public debate about architecture quite often just stays on contemplating the final result, the sort of the architectural object. And this sort of is the latest tower in London a gherkin or a sausage or a sex tool? So recently we asked ourselves if we could actually sort of invent a format that could actually tell the stories behind the projects, maybe combining images and drawings and words to actually sort of tell stories about architecture. And we discovered that we didn't have to invent it. It already existed in the form of a comic book. So we basically copied the format of the comic book to actually tell the stories of behind the scenes, how our projects actually evolve through adaptation and improvisation, sort of to the turmoil and the opportunities and the sort of the incidents of the real world. We call this comic book Yes is More, which is obviously a sort of evolution of the ideas of some of our heroes. In this case, it's Mies van der Rohe's Less is More. He triggered the modernist revolution. After him followed the postmodern counter-revolution, Robert Venturi saying less is a bore. After him, Philip Johnson sort of introduced, you could say, promiscuity or at least openness to new ideas with I'm a whore. Recently, Obama has introduced optimism at a sort of time of global financial crisis. And what we'd like to say with Yes is More is basically trying to question this idea that the architectural avant-garde is almost always negatively defined as who or what we are against. The cliché of the radical architect is this sort of angry young man rebelling against the establishment, or this idea of the misunderstood genius frustrated that the world doesn't fit in with his or her ideas. Rather than revolution, we're much more interested in evolution, this idea that things gradually evolve by adapting and improvising to the changes of the world. In fact, I actually think that Darwin is one of the people who best explains our design process. His famous evolutionary tree could almost be a diagram of the way we work. As you can see, a project evolves through a series of generations of design meetings. At each meeting, there's way too many ideas, only the best ones can survive. And through a process of sort of architectural selection, we might choose a really beautiful model, or we might sort of have a very functional model. We mate them. They have sort of mutant offspring. And through these sort of generations of design meetings, we arrive at a design. A very literal way of showing it is a project we did for a library and a hotel in Copenhagen. The design process was like really tough, almost like a struggle for survival. But sort of gradually an idea evolved, this sort of idea of a rational tower that melts together with the surrounding city, sort of expanding the public space onto what we refer to as a Scandinavian version of the Spanish Steps in Rome, but sort of public on the outside as well as on the inside with the library. But Darwin doesn't only explain the evolution of a single idea. As you can see, sometimes a subspecies branches off, and quite often we sit in a design meeting and we discover that there's this great idea. It doesn't really work in this context, but for another client in another culture, it could really be the right answer to a different question. So as a result, we never throw anything out. We keep our office almost like an archive of architectural biodiversity. You never know when you might need it. And what I'd like to do now in a sort of act of sort of warp speed storytelling is tell you the story of how two projects evolved by adapting and sort of improvising to the happenstance of the world. The first story starts last year when we went to Shanghai to do the competition for the Danish National Pavilion for the World Expo in 2010. And we saw this guy, Hai Bao. He's the mascot of the expo. And he looked strangely familiar. In fact, he looked like a building we had designed for a hotel in the north of Sweden. When we submitted it for the Swedish competition, we thought it was a really cool scheme, but it didn't exactly look like something from the north of Sweden. The Swedish jury didn't think so either, so we lost. But then we had a meeting with a Chinese businessman who saw our design and said sort of, wow, that's the Chinese character for the word people. So apparently this is how you write people, as in the People's Republic of China. We even double-checked. And at the same time, we got invited to exhibit at the Shanghai Creative Industry Week. So we thought, like, this is too much of an opportunity. So we hired a feng shui master. We scaled the building up 3 times to Chinese proportions and went to China. So the People's Building, as we called it, this is our 2 interpreters sort of reading the architecture. It went on the cover of the Wen Huibao newspaper, which got Mr. Lang Yuchen, the mayor of Shanghai, to visit the exhibition. And we had the chance to explain the project. And he said, Shanghai is the city in the world with most skyscrapers, but to him it was as if the connection to the roots had been cut over. And with the People's Building, he saw an architecture that could bridge the gap between the ancient wisdom of China and the progressive future of China. So we obviously profoundly agree with him. Unfortunately, Mr. Chen is now imprisoned for corruption. But like I said, Haibao looked very familiar because he is actually the Chinese character for people. And they chose this mascot because the theme of the expo is better city, better life, sustainability. And we thought like sustainability has grown into being this sort of neo-Protestant idea that, you know, it has to hurt in order to do good. You know, you're not supposed to take long warm showers, you're not supposed to fly on holidays because it's bad for the environment. Because gradually you get this idea that sustainable life is less fun than normal life. So we thought that maybe it could be interesting to focus on examples where a sustainable city actually increases the quality of life. We also asked ourselves, what could Denmark possibly show China that would be relevant? You know, it's one of the biggest countries in the world, one of the smallest. China is symbolized by the dragon. In Denmark, we have a national bird, the swan. China has many great poets, but we discovered that in the People's Republic public school curriculum, they have 3 fairy tales by An Tushun, or Hans Christian Andersen, as we call him. So that means that all 1.3 billion Chinese have grown up with The Emperor's New Clothes, The Matchstick Girl, and The Little Mermaid. It's almost like a fragment of Danish culture integrated into Chinese culture. The biggest tourist attraction in China is the Great Wall. The Great Wall is the only thing that can be seen from the moon. The biggest tourist attraction in Denmark is The Little Mermaid, that can actually hardly be seen from the canal tours.